Well, when you do television news, it's great because you have all that immediacy. But then I kept meeting people who I wanted to hear more from. The stories, as you can tell them on television, are so brief and fleeting. And so one of the reasons I went back to do a book, I returned to Libya, was to meet some of the people I'd met while doing Channel 4 News again and hear their stories in greater detail and greater depth. And it was extraordinary because they all had such amazing stories to tell. When I visited the relatives of people who'd been killed in the Abu Slim massacre in 1996, I felt actually an extraordinary sense of guilt because 1,270 men were murdered in cold blood. They were herded into this yard and the soldiers stood on the top of the roofs and just gunned them down. And I met the relatives of these men and I hadn't known anything about it. It had been kept secret for so long. And I realized that they'd had no opportunity to meet journalists before. Some of them had spoken to a few human rights groups, but that was all. And I felt a sort of obligation to try and tell some of their stories because I felt it was so little known, and because of the fact that not only had their husbands, their fathers, their sons been killed, but they didn't even know it, that they carried on taking food, clothing, toiletries to the prison for years and years after their relatives were dead and the government hadn't told them anything. I found it haunting, and that was one of the reasons I felt I had to write the book. Oh, Libya was a deeply unhappy country. I mean, basically, Libya, people in Libya could glimpse the world outside because they had satellite television. They had, Facebook and all of this, but mainly satellite television. And so the idea which Gaddafi had, which was that they were all sitting around reading his bizarre philosophy in the little green book, was complete nonsense. And they could see, as the years went by, how the world was changing, and Libya wasn't changing because Gaddafi was sitting on top of it like a great big fat toad, and nothing could move underneath him. So as society changed and technology changed, nothing changed in politics, and that made people very unhappy. And also, people were driven into their own groups, family, clan, tribe. You couldn't trust people because the state was so cruel, because it killed people, it lifted people, it stuck people in prison for no reason, because power was wielded in this arbitrary way. People couldn't trust anybody else. Libya is a place of rumour and mistrust. And as I say in the book, it's also a place of many, many secret graves. Oh, well, it was different phases. When we first went into the East, which was when the revolution was just starting, I say we here, it's myself and my camera operator and producer, we spent a lot of time hurtling up the road to the front line because the revolution, very conveniently, they had most of their battles on the main road, which is very unusual in these circumstances. And so we would drive up. We had a wonderful driver called Jabala, who was a joy and very brave. And we would film at the front line, which was sometimes quite dangerous. And it was quite often more dangerous because the rebels didn't know what they were doing. And they would shoot in the air all the time, and what goes up must come down. And sometimes they shot themselves or each other because they had no training at all. So it wasn't just the incoming from the government you had to worry about, it was the people who you were reporting on. Anyway, that would take us like a couple of hours to get up there, and a couple of hours there, and then back again. And then we edit the story and send our story. Nowadays, we have these small satellite dishes so we can send our own stories. And there was no censorship or anything on the rebel side. It was wild. It was a bit too wild at times, but it was fun. But then when I was in Tripoli briefly, it was very different because there was the government trying to stop you talking to people, and people being afraid to talk to you, and being herded in buses around the place to only go where they wanted you to go. And so that was very frustrating, and sometimes not being allowed out of the hotel at all, being under hotel arrest. So those were some of the frustrations. But I have to say that what I loved in my days was just meeting Libyans and talking to Libyans. I think everybody has their own danger threshold, and you have to know what yours is. I didn't feel that the Eastern Front was too dangerous for me. It was fine. And one of the reasons for that was because you could go up, film, and get out pretty quickly. And a lot of danger is about how long you expose yourself to danger for. If you're only there for half an hour, you are less likely to be killed than if you stay up there all day. And obviously, I mean, it's a very difficult subject for me now because Marie Colvin was one of my best friends, and she and I had dinner in Beirut before she went across the border illegally into Syria, into Homs, and I said that it was beyond my danger threshold. I couldn't do it. I just knew that it was too much for me. But she was always braver, and Marie always went in further and stayed longer, and that's why her stories were so brilliant, and that's also why she was killed, because her danger threshold was further out than most of the rest of ours. I suppose one of the memories I will never lose is when I went to Misrata the day after Gaddafi was killed. And I found the group of rebels who had captured him. They said they weren't the ones who killed him. I'm not sure about that. But meeting them, and they showed me all the paraphernalia that he had had on him. They showed me the satellite phone which he carried with him, a little amulet, which is a sort of African charm for good luck, which was wrapped in paper and sellotape. They showed me his boots, which had an inch-high heel. He was very self-conscious about being short. And most extraordinarily, his golden pistol. So it was rather beautiful. It had a sort of fleur-de-lis pattern on it, and it had an engraving in it in Arabic, which I'm told means the sun will never set on Al-Fatah revolution. Al-Fatah is the name he gave to his revolution. And I picked it up and I handled it, and I thought, oh God, I'm holding Gaddafi's gun. And that to me was the most extraordinary moment. And then the other moment, which I will never forget, is coming into Tripoli on 24th of August, which was the day Gaddafi fell and fled the city, and we came in with rebels from the Western Mountains. And they were all charging down this street, Gargarash it's called, cheering and screaming and shouting. And then people came out onto their balconies and onto the road to cheer. And an old man was there in a long robe, and he went down and prayed, and he shouted, "This is my country. These are my people. These are all my sons." God, it makes me cry thinking about it now. It was an amazing moment. And even though I know things will go badly in Libya at times, and it will be very difficult, and they will mess things up because human beings always do, I think that moment when people felt that at last they could take control of their own lives and their own country, that was something I can never forget.